Welcome to the Digital Nomad Experts, brought to you by Commute. Today we have got Bobby Casey here, who is an international tax lawyer who focuses on tax residency and company structure consulting for location-independent entrepreneurs. I personally work with Bobby for all things tax-related questions when it comes to my digital nomad life and business. And I actually met Bobby, I couldn't remember, I want to say it was 2021. Do you know Bobby was 20?
I think it was 2021,
I think,
if I'm not mistaken, because I did Nomad Cruise in 2019, and 2020, of course,
COVID hit.
kind of the world shit the bed, so to speak. And then I think there was the Nomad Base event. I'm pretty sure it was in like spring or spring of
I
21
think,
or early
yeah,
summer.
I think you're right. I also did Nomad Cruise in 2019. I think we might have done different ones. There was two that year because I hadn't met you till 2021 in Mexico at Nomad Base. If you're listening to this and you're like, what are these things? It's just big kind of business conferences for digital nomads. So when we were in Mexico, I think I actually got dinner with you first before you gave a speech, before I knew anything about you and what you did. I just met you as a real human, which was really fun. I had no idea that you even worked in tax stuff. And then I heard you give a talk at Nomad Base about taxes, and very fascinating. I feel like you knew so much. And I remember you actually hosted a lunch. I want to say it was the next day or so. You're like, anyone who's interested in learning more, come. And there was probably like 30 plus people, maybe more, crammed into it was overflowing, probably more than you thought would even come, every corner of the room. And when I joined I signed up to work with you for my taxes right after that, because there was people from all over the world, all different countries, throwing every question possible at you about specific situations with their residency, taxes, businesses. And you just answered every question left and right with a knowledge that I had never heard anybody at all talk about digital nomad taxes specifically, because it's, even the best accountants, I feel like, in the US are not familiar with the kind of tax law and consultancy that you do. So that's my quick intro, but I'd love for you to share.
It's a niche.
Niche of a niche of a niche.
It's a niche for sure.
And
Yeah.
you truly, I say this from like the bottom of my heart, are the best that I have ever encountered, which is why I chose to work with you.
Thank you.
And anyone who reaches out to me, I have shared you with like countless number of friends. When anyone has questions, I'm like, I don't know the answer, but like Bobby's your guy. So with that, if you could share a little bit about where you're from, your different residencies. You have 4 different residencies, 2 different home bases, and just give a little background, more than I did, about your personal kind of travel, life, residencies, all of that.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from North Carolina and grew up there. I grew up in the kind of family and lifestyle where it's very shunned to even leave your hometown. Like, it's very, very looked down upon. Actually, my mother just recently told my youngest son he's never allowed to leave his hometown. Like, oh my God, it's so crazy. But yeah, I think maybe a little bit of that pushback was my own anti-establishment, anti-rule following kind of nature. Like, oh, you tell me I can't move? That's exactly what I'm going to do kind of attitude. But I've always been an entrepreneur. Even when I was a teenager, I had my own businesses and started like my first, let's say, real company when I think I was 20. I'm not mistaken, and just had several different companies over the years, ranging. I had an installation company. We did home installs of a lot of different types of products, like consumer products. We actually covered about 2/3 of the US by the time I sold the company, like 2/3 of the zip codes. I had a restaurant at one point, real estate development at one point. I owned a crypto mine for a few years. I was a partner in a crypto mine. I sold out, and then I started a mine with another partner. I had a crypto mine for a few years. Man, I've had so many different businesses. I had an e-commerce store at one point. Actually, funny story. Since I've been doing, like, for 20 years or so, since I've been doing this like tax and company structure and asset protection and residency consulting for clients, I had so many clients that were doing like Amazon e-commerce. So many clients had like Amazon stores. So I went out and bought an Amazon store one year because I just wanted to understand it more, so I knew
Wow.
more about it. Funny, it's like I bought it. I found a deal. Somebody just trying to get rid of their store. They weren't doing that great. So I bought their store. I turned it around. And I ended up giving it to a friend of mine. I didn't even sell it.
Wow.
I just said, listen, I don't want to do this anymore. And you like to do e-commerce. I'll tell you what, I'll just give it to you and that's it. And he goes, really? I'm like, yeah, you can just have
Take
it.
it away.
You can just have it. Like, I'm not even going to charge you for inventory. Literally, just I will transfer the company over to you. Take it away. Yeah.
You're a good friend.
So I did that. I did that for a while. Just and for me, it was an education experience. I made a few bucks during the year, but it was education so I could understand better about like what these e-commerce sellers were dealing with, especially with Amazon stores. But yeah, I've been, I guess you would say, really full-time nomadic now for at least 15 years, maybe a bit longer. I started traveling a lot probably 20 years ago, but I didn't like full-time move abroad until 15-ish years ago. And I ended up moving to Estonia on a whim. I'd never even been to Estonia, never even visited Estonia. Actually, probably a year and a half earlier, I probably never heard of Estonia. And funny story is I have a degree in Russian language,
Did not know
and
that.
I thought it would, yeah, I thought it would be cool to, I have a couple of different undergraduate degrees, but one of them is in Russian language, and I thought it would be cool to go to a former Soviet country where I could practice speaking Russian. And a friend of mine said they had lived in Estonia. You'll love it there. I'm like, great, I'll move. And I moved to Estonia with, well, we're now divorced, but my at the time wife and 3 kids literally just went.
Wow.
Never even visited.
Brought the whole family.
And yeah, we all went. Yeah, it was like, initially it was supposed to be a 6-month test. And then while we were there, we decided to extend it for another 6 months. We still had like a home and cars and all the stuff, the suburbia stuff back in North Carolina. And we came back after 1 year basically to sell everything and do it like full time. But funny story is when I moved to Estonia, the first day I was there, I went a few days before with my middle son. Me and him, we kind of went and did like a backpacking thing through Europe, flew into Prague and backpacked our way up to Estonia. And my wife and other 2 kids came like, I don't know, like a week or 2 later, something like that. And when the day we got to Estonia, we were trying to figure things out. And we got into a taxi, and I spoke to the taxi driver in Russian, and he told me in Russian, did not talk to him in Russian. And that's when I realized Estonians really hate speaking Russian. And that hit me a few more times, and I thought, well, this is kind of funny that like one of the main reasons for moving here was to practice Russian, and now I don't get to do that. So it was kind of funny. But yeah, that was kind of the start of the international journey. Then we all moved to Latvia. We just liked Latvia a bit better, living in the Baltic region. Traveled a lot during that period. We had a home base in Latvia and even lived in a couple of different places for a few months at a time, just to spend time in different places. And then ended up traveling a lot. Business blew up, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the story on how it started.
That's amazing. And you're like OG digital nomad. And for anyone listening, I think it's important for someone, if you have someone to help you with taxes, I think, somebody could understand this, but for someone who lives this lifestyle and can help you with your taxes, understands this in a way that most just, someone who's in a home base in a country doesn't understand. But so you've done a bunch of different businesses. At what point did you start specifically helping people with digital nomad type taxes?
Well, so let me rewind. Yeah. Also, I've got to say my father and my grandfather and my father were both business owners. Okay. My grandfather owned with a partner a chain of restaurants, and my father owned a construction company. And my father, by training, was an accountant. So I was raised in an environment where tax talk was normal dinner conversation. Like I knew about like how to file tax returns and stuff as a teenager. I knew about company structure.
That's what I wish we were all learning in school. You were ahead of the curve.
But, yeah. I mean, I had my first brokerage account trading stocks when I was 14. Like I had my dad co-sign to open the account, but I was the active trader on the account from when I was 14. So like I had a lot of background in this type of thing, and it was normal dinner talk for us to talk about tax optimization, how to, take advantage of certain tax loopholes and that sort of thing. And for me, that was always fascinating, number one, because I've always been anti-establishment. And as far as I'm concerned, the less tax you pay, the more that stays in your pocket. And as an entrepreneur, you're a much better allocator of capital than the government. So this is a little bit kind of my personal mission, is to help entrepreneurs keep as much of their capital in their pocket, because I just think entrepreneurs are much better allocators of capital than governments. And this was just a general theme in my house as a kid growing up. So it was always there. But around 23 years ago, 2001, I know it was 2001. So 23 years ago, I had a lot going on business-wise. I owned 3 different businesses and had a lot going on. And I actually hired somebody like me to help with some planning and asset protection planning and some tax planning and stuff like that. And just going through the process with him, and he actually later became my mentor, ironically. His name is Bob. And we still talk every once in a while. He still sends me clients because he's more or less retired. He still deals with his existing clients, but he doesn't take new clients anymore. And to me, it was just a fascinating topic. It's just like solving a puzzle. I just loved it. And not only did I love the concept of like solving the puzzle, but I liked the people I was dealing with, because they were all entrepreneurs, which is, kind of my people. And so I started kind of doing it a little bit with my mentor, because I had basically all of my friends owned their own businesses. I didn't even have friends that had jobs. I didn't really, just literally didn't have friends that had it. Basically, if you didn't ride or race motorcycles or have your own business, I probably didn't know you for like a very long period of time. And I just worked with some clients together with my mentor, and that's kind of how it got started. So 23 years ago, and then things evolved over time. And I started doing a lot of just consulting, just helping people one-on-one kind of get their structure right, either for asset protection planning, privacy planning, tax optimization, stuff like that. And what I found is over the years, I was referring my clients to different people. Like, you need to register a company here. Let me recommend you here. You need to set up a trust. Let me recommend you here. You need a virtual mailbox. Let me send you over here. You need this and this and this. And over the years, I got tired of referring people to all these different things. So I just started all of these companies myself.
And I am a member of those companies that you have started, because they are useful. So we will, as we talk about those, we will mention them throughout this podcast and give you the links if you are, for you listening to join directly if you feel like it is helpful for you. So with that, I had some people write in from our audience asking specific questions they have. So we're going to do some real specific ones at the end if there's time. And I know with everything for you, it's really important. It's hard to answer questions without knowing someone's like entire background, financial, residency, all of that. But it's still fun to kind of hear your thought process. But to start, I kind of summed up a bunch of general questions that we've had over time that people submitted as well. To start with just the most broad point of just kind of general digital nomad tax questions. Because to start with, I would say, if you've never traveled and lived as a digital nomad, the first question that people have is just like, how do I even stay compliant with tax laws while I move around? Like, do I have to pay taxes in every country that I live in, if it's for a month, 6 months, a year? Do I have to pay my home taxes no matter what? That's, I think, and what happens if I work for a company? Like, are they paying taxes? How do I live in different places and still work for a company over here? So that's like 20 questions in one already. But can you just share in your general words of like, what's kind of the broadest thing, the first thing that people need to understand as they start their digital nomad life about just kind of general taxes?
I'll start with some disclaimers
Yes.
and some clearing up a lot of misinformation.
Perfect.
So first disclaimer is, please, under no circumstance, do not take this conversation as a direct advice on what you should do in your personal situation, because there are so many variables that go into determining your best situation. And a lot of times, and I get this constantly when I speak at events or one-on-one conversations or consultations, people say, well, I read on Facebook in this Facebook group, they said I should just do a Dubai company or an Estonian company, and that makes everything peachy. Like that solves all my problems. Or I'm a Canadian with an e-commerce business selling in North America, living in Thailand, and somebody told me I just need to register a company in Estonia. That's what I should do. Don't ever take what you're hearing in this show or any Facebook post or any blog post or anything. Don't ever take it at face value. That's what you have to do because there's so many variables. We have to look at your citizenship, your residency, your physical residency, your tax residency. They're not the same thing always. We have to look at where you physically spend your time, the nature of your business, how you get paid, where you get paid, what currency you get paid in. Do you sell physical goods or digital goods? I mean, there
Just a
are
few
like your family status, like whether you're married or if you have kids. I mean, kids dramatically impact your tax situation, or they can anyway. Like, for example, if you want to be nomadic, but you're going to have two home bases and you're going to register your kid in school in one place and travel the rest of the year, you're absolutely going to be a tax resident in that country because in order for you to register your kid in school, you're going to be registered as a resident and you're going to be in the country long enough to be considered a tax resident. But if your kid is homeschooled, well, now we have a whole different set of variables to consider. So don't take anything at face value. If you read on a Facebook post or on a blog or on a forum or something that a Dubai company is the best structure for you, the only thing that should do is to give you a starting point for your questions with your tax professional. And you can go to that person and say, hey, what do you think about a Dubai company in my situation? Let's talk about it. It's only an idea starting point. So that's like my first disclaimer.
Yeah, I just want to say this so we can remember. If you could also break down the difference for people between a citizenship, residency, and a tax residency. So if you want to do that now or afterwards, whichever way is easier.
Yep. So citizenship is your nationality. That's where you were born or where you have naturalized or well, there's lots of ways to get citizenship, but born or naturalization are the two main ways. You can also buy citizenship in some countries. Some countries you can marry into it. I mean, there's a lot of different variables, but citizenship is your nationality.
Typically,
that's
yeah,
the passport.
that's like where you have your passport.
Yep. Physical residency is where you have like rights to reside, like a residence permit or a residency visa. That's where you have the rights to reside. That is managed by the migration office of that country. So you have to follow a checklist of things that you have to do to be able to legally reside in that country and get a residence permit or a residence visa to stay in that country. That only is your physical residency. That does not necessarily make you a tax resident. Now, it might, because sometimes tax residency and physical residency overlap, but not always. I can give some examples of that. I'll explain tax residency first. Tax residency is managed by the tax office in that country. They have a different set of rules of what it means to be a tax resident in that country. And, you know, you may have heard, I'll give another disclaimer and dispel one piece of misinformation is probably all of your digital nomad listeners have heard of the 183-day rule. If you're in the country 183 days, you're automatically a tax resident.
And that's for the U.S. or in general, anywhere you're saying?
People say that everywhere. Okay. I've heard that people say you name a country, somebody has told me they believe they're a tax resident if they're there 183 days. Period. I don't know. I think maybe somebody wrote a blog post like 15 years ago. And people keep referencing. Yeah, they keep referencing that blog post as their source.
That's so funny.
Now. But there is no such thing as a 183-day tax rule. Please hear me. There is no such thing as a 183-day tax rule. Now, some countries do have a 183-day tax rule as one of their criteria that you could be considered a tax resident for. Spain is a great example. That is one example where they do have a 183-day tax rule. However, There are multiple ways where you could be considered a tax resident in Spain and still spending less than 183 days a year. So you can't just say, I wasn't here 183 days, I'm fine. I actually have only found, and I've researched a lot of countries, I've only found one country so far that they have a very clear 183-day tax rule. That's it, period. Only one, and it's Ukraine. That's the only one I've found. A lot of people think if you're in the U.S. 183 days, you are a tax resident. Not true at all. You can actually do a Google search, type in IRS substantial presence test, and there's a worksheet, and it's a 3-year rolling history based on there's a calculation based on the previous 3 years of your time in the U.S. that determines whether you hit that tax rule. It's not super complicated, but basically you take the number of days you were in the U.S. 2 years ago, you multiply that times 1/6. You take the number of days you were in the U.S. in the previous year, you multiply it times 1/3. You take the number of days you were in the U.S. in the current year, you add those three numbers up. If that number is more, or it's 183 or more, and you were in the U.S. in the current year for 31 days or more, you're a tax resident.
I've never heard that one. It's so complicated.
Yeah, it is. I get that a lot from Canadians, because a lot of Canadians want to go spend time like in Arizona or Florida.
Right.
And Canadians, under immigration rules, can spend 180 days a year in the U.S. visa free. They don't have to worry about it. Now, technically, they can't work, but they can physically spend 180 days a year consecutively in the U.S. So they think they go live 180 days at their condo in Florida and they're fine, but they're not. They actually have become tax residents if they do that. And even if they're not working in the U.S., they're taxable on worldwide income. So if they have income from Canada, they would still have to pay tax in the U.S. on Canadian income if they do that. But a lot of people think, oh, I wasn't there 183 days, I'm fine. Well, that's not accurate. So that's a huge piece of misinformation that has come from the black hole we all know as the internet, the black hole of misinformation known as the internet. You have to look at each individual country separately on what their tax residency rules mean for you, specifically for you. And there's way too many variables that go into this to just throw a blanket over it.
And I think it's interesting as you start to give examples, because until I started talking to you, I was the same. I was the person before reading the blog post. It's like, okay, I should get a residency here. This is the best option, or this is what I could do. And then I talk to you and you're like, tell me your specific information. This is best for you. I ended up getting a residency in Mexico based on your advice. I know you have 4 different residencies. I don't know if you want to share any reasons like why you chose what you did. But if anything, I think, as you listen to Bobby today, it's a helpful starting point, as you said, of this is a great point just to start to understand even the right questions to be asking, whether it's Bobby or someone else. And we'll also give you some information of if you want Bobby to be the one who helps you, because you can hear all the information that he knows. Like, it is so specific to everyone's individual background, and a blanket country that's good for me for residency might be different for Bobby, might be different than, Jeff or, anybody else. So continue on, but I think your disclaimers are very helpful.
It is very specific. Like, I had a client call yesterday with a guy who has a very successful business. The revenue's in the mid 7 figures. Net income is in the low 7 figures. And he wanted to move to Dubai. Canadian guy. He wanted to move to Dubai and get tax residency in Dubai and register his company in Dubai. One problem: he hates Dubai. Okay, but in order to maintain residency in Dubai, you have to spend a minimum of 30 days a year. And in my opinion, that's 1/12 of your year. You're going to sacrifice your life doing something you hate just for the sake of saving money on taxes. Well, it makes no sense to me. Like, there are other options. Dubai is not your only option there. There are other options. And he's also Canadian and he's nomadic, which means, and this brings me to another disclaimer, to dispel another piece of misinformation. Most nationalities if you're nomadic, you actually do not need to be a tax resident anywhere. It's not necessary. Actually, you don't need to be a physical resident anywhere either. Now, I say it's not necessary. It's a good idea to have residency somewhere, but if you truly are a nomadic person and you can float around and you stay and you arbitrage your way across the world and you can stay out of the tax trap of each country, actually for most nationalities, you're way better off not having tax residency. This guy I was talking to, Canadian guy, it's really easy for Canadians to give up their tax residency if they choose to be nomadic, and they don't have to file or pay tax anywhere in the world. It's amazing. Like, we can even have a company structure for them where they have zero company tax, zero personal tax, zero social tax. It's actually super easy for Canadians. Actually, it's super easy for most nationalities. Not Americans, by the way. But most people think I have to get tax residency somewhere or else I will get caught in the tax trap of my home country. That is not accurate. Now, in most countries. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Like most of your Scandinavian countries, like Norway, Finland, Sweden, all require you to be a tax resident somewhere else, at least to exit their country. Like Finland has what's called the 4-year rule. So if you're a Finnish person and you leave Finland, if you're nomadic, you're going to have to file and pay taxes in Finland for the next 4 years. But if you go get tax residency somewhere else, even for 1 year, you have disconnected from Finland, and then you don't have to worry about it. Australia is a little bit similar. They don't have a 4-year rule, though. They have, if you leave, you have to prove to them you're a tax resident somewhere else, or the ATO. ATO is the Australian Tax Office. They hang on to you forever. So, like what a lot of my Australian clients do, they'll move to the UK for like 1 year, get residency there, tell the ATO they've moved to the UK, they cut ties with the ATO, and then they leave the UK because it's really easy to exit the tax system in the UK. So it's a good kind of interim. It's a little bit of a hassle, right, for Australians to have to do that, but it's worthwhile if you want to disconnect completely. And when I say disconnect, I mean you literally not filing taxes and paying taxes anywhere. Now, of course, my favorite argument here is, but what about the roads? Of course, like what happens if we don't pay taxes? You're just leeching off society. It's always a moral argument. And I'll be honest, the moral argument generally comes from people who don't understand the way governmental systems work and how they're funded. Generally speaking, your income tax doesn't fund anything that you're doing in a country. Like if you live in a place, like if you live indoors, which we all do, right? Whether you're living in a hotel, an Airbnb, or a long-term rental, you're paying property tax one way or another through your rental payments, either your nightly, monthly, weekly, whatever. Well, property taxes pay for things like local services and schools in that area. Generally speaking, in most countries, that's what property taxes pay for. Things like sales tax and VAT pay for local services like police and fire. That's that type of thing. So if you ever eat or drink anything or buy anything, you're already paying for the services that you consume in that geography. A lot of people make a moral argument. Well, if I don't pay income tax, I'm just screwing over the whole society. Well, not really true. If you're traveling, you take a taxi somewhere, you take a bus, you take a plane. All of those things have taxes built into them. Fuel taxes for like cars and trains and planes also. They all have fuel taxes built in, airport taxes, those types of things. Those all pay for infrastructure in those areas. So whenever you get into a taxi in Merida to go across town, you're paying a fee to the taxi driver to take you there. Well, obviously he builds into that fee what he's paying for in fuel to take you there. So through a third-party proxy, you are paying fuel tax to drive on those roads, right? So you just have to think about things in a little bit different way. Income tax is basically you're not funding government, like federal government programs, debt service, military, those types of things.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying. Super helpful.
So I I always bring that up as a
'Cause
preemptive
someone's
strike
thinking it.
against. Yeah, I always bring it up as a preemptive strike against the moral warriors who want to tell me, you're screwing over the
The whole
community by not
world.
paying income tax.
Yeah, no, super
Yeah.
helpful.
And generally speaking, if you are nomadic, most of us, not all of us, but most of us are pretty heavy consumers. I mean, most likely we're paying higher than market rents, which include taxes on top of that. We're probably eating out more than most locals do, at least if we're like short-term nomadic. I mean, we're consumers. We're actually in the consumption through consumption taxes. We're actually generally providing more value to the community than even locals are.
Yeah, I
From
never
that
thought about it
perspective.
that way. Thank you. Can you
Yeah,
share, so for someone just starting to think about this, I'd love
yeah,
kind of two different examples, and I know every situation is so different, but could you give sort of like walk through these two paths of like maybe someone who lives in the US and works for a company or owns their own business and is not like doesn't want to move anywhere, is kind of like maybe a new digital nomad moving somewhere every month or two, and like what that looks like if they're paying taxes just in their home or anywhere else. And then alternatively, maybe somebody who's like, I just have a dream to move to Spain or, live in Panama or live in, I know every country is different, but if you could just kind of give examples, I think people are like, do I have to pay taxes in both places? Do I have to pay taxes in every country if I don't have a tax residency? So for someone who's maybe never gotten a tax residency or a different residency or is like just started their nomad journey, like, can you explain maybe in year one, like before they've really done anything else, like what does that look like for them?
So I'll hit on Americans
Yeah.
first because Americans are one of only two nationalities in the world where they are taxed based on their citizenship.
Okay.
So so what I call a tier 4 country. There's only two. There's the U.S. and Eritrea, and it's a citizenship-based worldwide taxation, meaning as long as you're a citizen of that country, you have a tax filing and a tax paying obligation back to your home country, regardless of where you are in the world, anywhere in the world. So I'm going to make a broad assumption. You probably don't have a lot of Eritreans listening here, so we'll talk to the Americans. Actually, I do have one Eritrean friend, and I found out what the situation there is. And she said when she was a kid, her family moved to Germany, and they just left. They didn't pay tax anymore. They didn't do anything back in Eritrea. I guess her family didn't know any better. And then one day when she was like a late teen, her family decided to go back and visit family, and they get to the border, and at the border they wouldn't let them enter the country because they were non-compliant, and they basically walked them back to the counter and made them buy a plane ticket to go back.
I thought they were going to
Germany.
let them in and make them pay like back taxes for 20 years.
No, that's the only thing they did is they said, nope, you just can't enter the country. I did have one quick story just to rewind just for a second that reminded me of that, about people just reading information on Facebook or whatever, or a forum or a blog. I had a Swedish client about it might have been 2 years ago now, but he came to me with a big problem. And long story short, he had left Sweden about 10 years prior to that, and he read on a blog and talked to a couple of friends that if he wanted to travel around Southeast Asia, he should just register a Hong Kong company, and then he wouldn't owe any tax, because in Hong Kong, theoretically, they don't tax you on income earned outside of Hong Kong. And he thought, I'll just do that. He got zero professional advice. He bought a plane ticket, left Sweden, moved, bounced around Southeast Asia like a lot of nomads do, registered his company in Hong Kong, very successful, had a very successful business, and decided after about 10 years he wanted to go back to Sweden and settle down and get married and make babies and all that stuff. And he went back and he re-registered as a resident. And when he did, they said, well, we need to see where you've been filing taxes the past 10 years, because we see here you didn't notify us of where you moved and where you became a tax resident of the year you exited. And he said, well, I wasn't a tax resident anywhere. And they said, all right. So they made him restate and file his taxes for the past 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
For all of his company and personal income. And he had to pay it back, and they put him on a payment plan, but he was, I don't know. It was well over €1 million worth. I don't remember what it was in what Swedish kroners, I guess. I don't remember what it was in kroners, but it was well over €1 million he owed in back tax for that period of time. All because he thought, yeah, I'll just listen to my friends and follow somebody on Facebook. See, the problem with doing that is the person you listen to, number one, he could just be wrong for himself and just hasn't found out he's wrong yet. Or she could have gotten bad advice from somebody else who eventually is going to screw her up. Or their situation is completely different from each other and they just followed somebody else's advice because they just made some assumptions. So you just can't do that. But back to your question. If you're an American, you're going to have to file and pay taxes back in the U.S. Now, there are some loopholes. By the way, this is not a political statement at all, but I don't know if your American audience knows, but Trump announced a couple of weeks before the election that if he was elected, he plans to eliminate tax filings and tax reportings for all expats, everyone who's not living full-time in the U.S. So if that comes true, that would be amazing. There's about 8 million Americans living abroad that are very frustrated having to file tax returns every year, even though they don't live in the U.S. So if that comes true, that is going to be great news for all the Americans living abroad who then can become like everyone else in the world, that they don't have to file and pay tax in their home country if they don't live there. But as it is right now, if that tax law or if he does not follow through on that promise, then you can take advantage of a loophole called the foreign earned income exclusion, which this year you can earn about $126,000 tax-free plus a housing allowance that it varies depending on which country you're in, but averages around $40,000 or $50,000. So you can get 170-ish thousand in tax-free income, approximately. I'm rounding. And if you earn less than that, then that's probably about all you need to do. There are some things you can do to eliminate your social tax. And by that, I mean like your Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security tax payment. If you want to, some people don't want to eliminate it. Some people want to contribute to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. If you do want to contribute, don't do anything different, contribute. If you don't want to contribute, then we have to think about how you structure your business a little bit differently. If you're an employee, you don't have a choice. You're going to be contributing no matter what. Your employer is going to withhold payroll tax on you no matter what. And you'll have to file your tax return at the end of the year and claim back the income tax that you paid. You can't get the social tax back, but you could get the income tax back.
And can you quickly, I know I feel like there's like always 30 different trains we can go off of all of these, but can you quickly, so the FEIE, which is the foreign earned income exclusion, is that's, I would say, of all my nomadic friends, from the US, that's the most popular that people sort of pursue. Can you give the criteria of again, explain a little bit of like, how do you get it and what does that mean for you and what are the criteria that you have to follow? Because it's kind of tricky. There's a lot of nuances of it.
So it's IRS Form 2555. If you want to Google search it, if you look up IRS Form 2555 with an I at the end, that's the instruction page and you can kind of read along the criteria. But there's two ways to qualify. The first is the physical presence test, which means you need to be physically out of the U.S. 330 days a year, maximum 35 days a year in the country, including travel days. So you got to be careful on that.
It's like in the air, international waters, on Nomad Cruise means you're not
any transit day to or from the U.S. is considered a day in the U.S. So if you had a flight that left at 12:01 a.m. out of New York, that is considered a day in the U.S.
Of that 1 minute that you are in New York still, yeah.
Yep, but that whole day is considered a day in the U.S. for tax purposes. Or the other way, if you landed in New York at 12:01 or 11:59, then I guess, let me think.
You were there that previous day, yeah.
That whole day, would be considered a full day in the U.S. as well for tax purposes. So to qualify, it's 35 days maximum in the country, including transit days. That's one method to qualify is the physical presence test. The other way to qualify is what's called the bona fide residency test. And that means you need to legally immigrate to another country and get that at a minimum, the physical residency in that other country. So that you either have a residence card, residence permit, residence visa, something like that, that gives you legal rights to reside in that country. And then you have a lot more flexibility on the amount of time you can be in the US. Now, there's not actually in the Internal Revenue Code, there's not actually any fixed number of days that says you have to be out of the US. That is another piece of misinformation that people think it's also you can only be in the US 35 days. That's not true. You have more flexibility. But what they look at is a lot of very subjective determinations on your connection to that other country. So, like Marissa, in your case, you have residency in Mexico. Yep. If you had like proof that you have like a Mexican cell phone number and maybe you go to the dentist once a year there and you've got like a gym membership there or an apartment lease or something like that, then that shows your center of vital interest is more in Mexico than it is in the US. So you have more flexibility. But kind of the rule of thumb is you can be in the US about 4 months a year under those guidelines. But you got to be careful on that subjective determination. Like, for example, if you still own a home in the US and you still have health insurance in the US and you still got a car in the US and you still have all these things connecting you to the US, and now you still spend 4 months a year out of the US, if you get audited, the IRS auditor, again, it's a subjective determination based on the auditor sitting across the table from you, but they could say, well, you're pretty connected to the US. We think you live here.
Wow.
And you're just on lots of long vacations.
Right. And do you have to stay, like would I need to stay in Mexico for a certain time, or as long as I have that Mexico residency and I'm in a different country every month and in the US for 4 months, does that mean, like, do you have to be in that country that you have residency in for most of the time if you're not in the US?
Not really. So the US considers your connection to that other jurisdiction, but there's ways you can prove that connection without, like I said, if you have a cell phone there, if you had an apartment there, if you go to the dentist and the doctor there, and you go to the chiropractor once a month, and you're a member of the local gym or something like that, you have these things to show connection. Ultimately, what it comes down to is when you file your tax return, there's a form you're going to file that goes with your 1040. It's just IRS form 2555. You're actually just declaring on there that you're a bona fide resident and you're going to tell them where you live in Mexico, and that's it. That's actually all you really do. The only thing would be if you get audited, then you're going to have to prove that connection to Mexico. But when it comes to filing your tax return, literally it's checking the box and I'm a bona fide resident of Mexico. This is where I live. And you give them the address and that's it.
Got it. And
you're not like submitting that. You're not submitting your dentist bills with your tax return to prove it, or your cell phone.
If someone then pushes you to ask, then it's helpful to have all those things. And one thing, this is kind of my personal opinion, I'm curious you take the same way that you mentioned that example, someone who was thinking about getting residency in Dubai, but they're like, I don't actually want to spend 30 days in Dubai. I don't like Dubai. I have a lot of friends who do the FEIE from the US, have been traveling for years, and they want to spend more time in the US. They're like, oh, I'm planning my life. I can only go home these 5 days here, and then I'm saving these 5 days for a wedding, and I'm going to go home for 1 week over Christmas, and I'm saving 7 days in case something happens. But in theory, they're like, I'd love to go back for a month or so and just like hang with my parents, but they don't because of the FEIE. So this is my personal opinion. I'm wondering if you share it, of like to think through, like, yes, you can save taxes, but at what point is your personal, your life, your family, where you want to be is also really important to consider.
Just go get residency in Mexico or another country, and then you can go back for a month or 2 or 3 every year. You have a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, perfect.
You just get residency somewhere else.
Yeah, perfect.
Like, it's super easy. It's the thing is with getting residency in another country, though, again, that country has their own rules for granting you, a residence permit. And so some countries, depending on the visa that you get, they might have minimum stay requirements to be in that country. Some countries don't have minimum stay requirements. Some of them do. Some of them do for one visa type and not for another visa type. Like Portugal, for example, if you get the golden visa for buying property, your minimum stay in Portugal is only 2 months out of the year. So if you go through all their tax residency rules, like if you own property in Portugal, but then you stayed under the amount of time that makes you a tax resident, you can be a physical resident in Portugal without being a tax resident. But if you go get a D7 visa, D7 visa requires you to stay in Portugal more than 183 days a year, which by default, under those visa rules and a couple of other things, that does make you a default tax resident in Portugal. So a D7, if you're trying to optimize for taxes, a D7 is not the smartest choice in Portugal. A D8 is the digital nomad visa, which does not have any minimum stay requirement. So a D8 might be a better choice if you're planning to be nomadic. Now, of course, if you're going to go live, if you can't afford to go buy, you really want to live in Portugal, you can't afford the property, the 500,000 euro minimum on the property, and you really just want to park yourself in Portugal and live there full time, well, the D7 is the way to go for non-European people. Now, if you're an EU person, you have a completely different path to residency in Portugal if you have an EU passport. So you have to consider the country where you're going to when it comes to your choice of residency.
Yeah.
So, like Paraguay is a great option for people who want to get residency, but they don't want to live there, because you can go get residency in Paraguay like in a couple of days. You'll get temporary residency good for 2 years. You go back 2 years later, and you can get permanent residency, and then you have to physically be in the country 1 day every 3 years to maintain your residency. And Paraguay does not tax you on any earnings outside of Paraguay. So they're what I call a tier 2 country, which is a residency-based territorial tax system. So a lot of people like Paraguay from a residency perspective, but I don't know too many people that like actually being like longer term living in Paraguay.
I have been to Paraguay. I wanted to leave like 2 hours after I got there, but I do have an Israeli friend who left his residency there and is doing the Paraguay residency for his tax purposes. I know people in I'm trying to think, Cyprus I know is a popular one, but I believe they have a couple months that you have to be there. So again, it really...
60 days.
Yeah.
Yep.
So again, maybe you love Cyprus and you live near there and it's perfect for you. Or, for me to, get my Mexican residency, it's a 2-hour flight from Atlanta to fly to Cancun. I have friends there. It's easy for me. So I think, for me, when I was working with Bobby, it's really important for you to understand, your life. Are you gonna be willing to fly to Paraguay every 2 years, even if it's only for 1 day? Do you want to stay in Cyprus or Dubai? All of these things are really important. You mentioned
flying from the U.S. to Asuncion and back for a 1-day
it's
trip
not
would
fun.
be miserable.
Yeah, it's a long travel day.
Miserable.
So
that's a long trip all the way down to Asuncion.
Yeah, and I went to Asuncion. I was like, there's nothing to do. I don't want to be here. These are important things to consider as well. But maybe that's fine for you. So again, if you're trying to figure it out,
language is another. Language is another consideration. Like, I personally love Hungary. I love the country. But for me, if I want a plan B option on a place to live, I would like to have the option, at least over a period of time, for permanent residency or citizenship over time. But man, I've already learned 2 hard languages, and I just don't think I have it in me to learn Hungarian.
What languages? You have Russian and Latvian?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and they're both very difficult. The funny story, I was in Hungary about 2 months ago, and I told a friend of mine I was there, I'm like, man, I really hope I do not meet and fall in love with a Hungarian girl here. I really don't want to have to learn Hungarian.
It's a hard
language. God, please don't. Please don't let me do this. Just keep your eyes down. Don't look around. Don't make eye contact.
That's hysterical. It makes a difference where you travel, where you want to meet someone. It does. You mentioned, I'm going to circle back even in a minute to our initial question. And I always know with you, I was like, I have 100 questions I want to ask, but the conversation's going to go where it goes. You mentioned digital nomad visas. A lot of people think they need a digital nomad visa if they're going to go somewhere for just a month or 2 months. So can you explain for the new nomad? Let's say I just got my very first remote job, or I just got the freedom working for my company, and I want to travel around a bit. Can you explain just the difference between like what is just a tourist visa and when might you need a digital nomad visa? And do you have to pay taxes when you have a digital nomad visa?
Well, I mean, basically, if you're only going for a month or two, generally speaking, go as a
Yes.
tourist. It's going to be, your life is going to be so much easier. The only reason you would want something more than a tourist visa is if you're going to stay longer than you're allowed to be in that country on a tourist visa. That's it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. Now, when it comes to digital nomad visas, it depends on the country. Some countries have different tax rules than others for your taxation. Like some countries say, okay, like Croatia has a digital nomad visa. Like they're one of the first. I think they were the first.
I thought
one
it
in
was
Europe
Estonia. Was it Croatia?
I think Croatia was
wow.
before Estonia. I don't
Somewhere
know.
around there.
We could
I
look
don't
it
know.
up.
You would know more than me.
Estonia had their e-residency
Oh, that's what
for
I'm
years,
thinking of. Yes.
which, by the way, was a very well-marketed piece of garbage.
Why is that? I feel like that's what I knew in my mind from
useless.
years ago. Can you explain it, or why is it useless?
It's completely useless. E-residency, the only thing it really does, I don't even have. I used to have my e-residency. I was looking to see if it was still sitting here in my desk. It might be. I might have it here. Basically, you have an RFID chip on the card, and the only thing it does, you can use a chip reader, and it allows you to digitally sign documents in Estonia for things like registering a company or signing contracts or paying taxes or that kind of thing. That's literally the only thing it does, which sounds lovely, I suppose, and they've marketed it as a way for digital nomads to register their companies in
more
Estonia.
So to start a business as an entrepreneur in Estonia.
Yeah, and that seems reasonable. And there are some narrow niches where an Estonian company does make sense. Like, for example, if you're selling digital products in the Europe, I'm sorry, physical goods, not digital. Definitely not digital. If you're selling physical goods in the US, it's going to be better for you to have an EU registered company. And Estonia is one of the easier ones to do. So that might be like e-residency could be a good path if you have an e-commerce business and you want to sell in the European Union, because it's going to be easier for you to import your goods into Europe if you have an EU registered company with an EU registered company with a VAT registration. So that could be a benefit for you in that scenario. But I see so many people that are like, I do coaching or consulting, or I sell info products, or I have a downloadable software, and I'm going to register my company in Estonia because I read it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's literally the dumbest thing you could possibly do on a company registration, because all of those products, because you're an Estonian registered company, you're going to have to charge all your clients 20% VAT. Whereas you could just register your company in the US, and instead of having a monthly tax report like you do in Estonia, you have an annual tax report like you do in the US. In the US, in most cases, you're going to pay zero tax on digital goods and one report a year and no VAT. You can sell your digital goods globally and be at a price advantage to your EU competitors over an Estonian company. It makes zero sense for digital goods and people doing courses and coaching and all that stuff to register in Estonia. And let's be honest, you've been to some of these digital nomad events. What does everyone do? It's digital products. Everyone. Coaching, consulting, digital downloads, info products, courses, ebooks.
Except for the few Amazon wholesalers, but everything else is, people selling digital courses,
Except
coaching.
for the Amazon people. Yep, except for the Amazon people. And that's what I mean. So 95% of the people sell something digitally, 5% are maybe on Amazon. Well, the 5% selling in the European Union, okay, great. That makes total sense for you. So the point is, does it work? Yeah, you can register an Estonian company, but there are much better options than Estonian companies for the vast majority of digital nomads. Right. It's funny. I gave a talk actually on the last Nomad cruise, or not the last one I was on last year, about a year ago. And afterwards, there was one German, I'm not going to name him, but there was a German guy who had an Estonian business, and he made it his life's mission every time he saw me on the boat to argue with me about how great Estonian companies were. And I thought it was hilarious. But the funny thing is, in his case, it did make sense for him to be an Estonian company because he lived in Estonia and he had an office with employees in Estonia. So it made sense in his case, but not for 95% of digital nomads.
And that's where you read the one blog post of this guy who says it's the best, and you're like, that's what I should do, but it's not.
That's what I should do, exactly. Because Tommy said it was the best thing ever,
Yeah. And what about, so for digital nomad visas, can you explain, is there ever a time where that would be a good thing for someone to get a digital nomad visa?
Only if you're staying longer than a tourist visa allows. Some of those digital nomad visas, you do have to pay tax in the country. Some of them you don't. Some of them, like Spain, for example, has a digital nomad visa where you have a tax break. You have a lower tax rate than the normal in-country tax rate. So some of them you don't, though. Like, I have to look at my cheat sheet on this, to be honest, but I think Croatia is one of the ones where you don't pay tax if your income is from outside of Croatia, if I'm not mistaken. But again, don't hold me to that. I have a cheat sheet for all my digital nomad visas. I'd have to go look that up.
Yeah, there's like always new ones being
but
added.
some of them, there's a ton now. We've done a bunch of blog posts on the Global Wealth Protection site about digital nomad visas. I don't even know how many blog posts we've got about it, but we've reviewed a bunch of them. But in my opinion, it only makes sense if you're planning to stay longer than the tourist visa allows. Otherwise, it really makes no sense. Most of your digital nomad visas also don't even put you on the path to like permanent residency or citizenship. So it doesn't even give you any long-term advantages other than that temporary stint of being able to stay in the country.
So basically the takeaway is there's a couple of them maybe that allow you to pay, fewer, like not pay double tax in both, but the majority of them sounds like it really just gives you permission to be there for maybe a year or so versus maybe 30, 60, or 90 days.
1 or 2 years.
1 or 2 years, and maybe you can keep renewing it versus if you just had a tourist visa, you'd have to stay for 30, 60, or 90 days, depending where it is, and then leave the country, and maybe you can come back, maybe you can't, but it's not necessarily helping you with taxes, and you may actually have to pay taxes in that country where you have the digital nomad visa and your home country, depending on the situation.
Well, generally speaking, you're not going to have to pay in both.
Okay.
Most of your Western countries have tax treaties nowadays, so you wouldn't.
So you'd pay in the country where you have a digital nomad visa, and that would be reduced by that much for your probably your home residency. Yeah. Cool.
In most countries, you get a tax credit back there. But again, for example, if you were Canadian and you decided to go live on a tourist visa, you wanted to go live in the EU for 89 days, because that would be the limit of your tourist visa in Europe. And then you wanted to go from, let's say, the European Union, and you decide, okay, I'm going to go live in Montenegro for a couple of months, and then I'm going to go to Southeast Asia and bounce around as a tourist. Well, you wouldn't have to pay tax in Canada either, in that case, as long as you did the proper things to exit the tax system back in Canada.
Right.
Same thing with Germany. If you were a German and you wanted to go live in Italy for 2 months, and then you wanted to go live in Montenegro for a couple of months and Thailand for a couple of months, as long as you exit your tax system correctly, in Germany it's really easy to exit the tax system. Literally all you do is go to the local municipality and tell them you've left.
I have a lot of German nomad friends who have done that. Yeah.
You'd be amazed though. Germans are some of the ones that push back the hardest.
It takes them a while. They're like, I don't want to do it. But then when they do, they're like, oh.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They're like, you can't not pay tax. I'm like, actually, ironically for Germans, it's ridiculously easy. You just go deregister where you live in your local municipality and leave, and that's it.
Can they go back?
It's a little more complicated if they have it's a little more complicated if they own a company.
Like a German company.
Depending on which type of, German company, yeah. Depending on which type of company. Like a GmbH takes a year for them to shut down. And it's actually expensive, like really expensive to shut down one of those companies.
Yeah, so interesting.
But can they go back? Yeah, if they go back, they just re-register.
Right. So I know for Israelis, for example, when they leave their residency there for taxes, they can only spend a certain amount of time there for the next 5 years. And so again, it's like important to consider, like, do you need to go visit family in places? Does, like, how important is that money? Is it more important than being there in your family? And there's no right or wrong answer, but again, these are all really important things to talk to someone like Bobby about if you're considering these things.
Yep. Israel has that thing where it's easy to exit the Israeli tax system. It's easy to exit, but then you have a very limited number of days you can be in the country for the next 5
Yeah,
years, or you by default restart
exactly. To go back.
your tax
And you
residency
owe
again.
all the
Yeah.
things. So,
It's a little bit like Finland's 4-year rule.
yes.
It's a little bit similar to Finland's 4-year
Yeah.
rule.
So I have two other questions, and then I know I could talk to you for like 72 more hours. We'll give some information at the end about what it looks like to work with you. I might ask one or two rapid fire questions that some of our audience wrote in as well. One question I want to ask you that a lot of people have in mind. So let's say I am working remotely from home in the US or somewhere for a company, and I don't ever need to go into an office, but I have my taxes and my company has taxes in a certain country, and I want to go travel the world, like not even move residency somewhere necessarily, but pop around for a different month or two on those tourist visas. I know a lot of companies push back and say like, oh, well, we'll be responsible for taxes. So they say, no, you can't do that. You have to stay and work in the country you're in. Is that true? And if someone has a company who's saying that, what can they tell to them?
Yes, it is true. Like for bigger companies, because let's say, for example, you work for a U.S. company. You're an American working for a U.S. company. It actually, you could pick any nationality, but you are working for a company in your country. Well, the problem is, if you're using the example, you're an American working for, I don't know, Microsoft, and you say, I want to go live in Mexico 3 months. Well, your employer can say, no, we don't allow you to do that, because the problem for them on their end is they would then need to register their company in Mexico as a employee, like a foreign office of their company, so that they could then hire you as a Mexican employee and then withhold Mexican tax on you.
Even if you're
So
there
that's why
under on a tourist visa?
they just say no, because it just makes it easier for them.
Right.
It just makes their life easier. So what to do in that situation? I mean, you got two options. Let's say you got three options.
Leave the company. No.
Well, okay, you got four options, right? So, yeah, I forgot about that one. You can quit. You can don't tell them and use a VPN. Now, that works in some companies not, depending on how tight the security is of your employer. Like if you worked for, like, I don't know, in the US, if you worked for if you had a security clearance working for like a government contractor or the Department of Justice, that would not fly. You would, because they have all their work computers locked down so tight. Even a VPN, you're not gonna get through with a VPN. But most of your employers, you should be fine with using a VPN. The additional hack you might want to do, just to be a little bit more safe, is have your own router with a pre-installed VPN that connects through a particular IP address in the US every time. And then when you travel, you just plug that router in to your internet cable there. The reason being is it's a more secure VPN connection than just like logging into like ExpressVPN or something like that, or Ghostery VPN. It's a more secure one. And also, you can screw up and forget to log into your VPN and log into your email or your company server or whatever and forget that you weren't on the VPN. So that's why it's better to have it through your router if you're going to do that. So don't tell them and use a VPN or a router with a VPN. That's a little bit of a shady thing if they told you absolutely no, but whatever, full disclosure, do with that information what you want. The other option is ask your employer to fire you and hire you as a contractor. That actually is becoming the go-to response by these bigger companies, because especially since COVID, when the whole world went and worked at home, a lot of your employers just said, actually, this is way nicer because we don't have to pay for all this office space anymore. I know there are some employers now that are saying, hey, we really want you to come back to the office. But then there's also a lot of pushback to that where people are saying, no thanks, we don't want to. So kind of the next evolution of that is they just fire you as a W-2 employee or a regular salaried employee, and then you renegotiate a contract with them, and then you're free to work wherever you want as long as you do that. And in that case, I would register like an LLC in the US and have your employer hire your LLC, and then you work for your LLC kind of thing. And then Fourth option is don't do it. Just do what your boss said and keep your ass parked in Akron, Ohio, and don't go anywhere, I
Yeah.
guess. Like,
Or switch, yeah, and we share a lot here about there's all types of companies now who are supportive of you living as a digital nomad. They're aware of it, they're okay with it, but yeah, there are a lot of the bigger and old school companies who just, don't do the workarounds and won't let you.
you'd be surprised though. A lot of the bigger ones are fine hiring you as a contractor because it's easier for
Yeah.
them. It's easier and cheaper for them to do it
Yeah.
anyway. And they don't have to deal with if you want to go live in Mexico or Argentina or Thailand or whatever. They don't have to deal with any cross-border issues because if they pay your Wyoming LLC, that's all they care
Yeah.
about. It's your problem to get the money from the Wyoming LLC to you,
Yeah.
and it makes their life a lot easier. And a lot of companies are on board with that. That's what I'm seeing
Yeah,
more
we are
and
too.
more of.
We are too. I think this can be hopefully a quick question, and then I want to share how people can work with you because I know we're running close to time. Someone asked, can I deduct travel expenses, co-working spaces, accommodations, and like business expenses as a digital nomad, like for my business?
As long as it's ordinary expenses for the operation of your business, sure. Yeah, of course. I mean, if your cell phone bill that you use at work, sure. If you have a space inside your apartment that you use as an office, you can have a home office deduction. If you're traveling to conferences, yes, hotels at the conference ticket, the flights to the conference, even some of your meals and entertainment, yes. If you're flying to Playa del Carmen because you just want to live there and you go rent an apartment in Playa and you fly there and you have zero business purpose to be there, then no, not really, unless somehow you can justify a business purpose for being there. Yeah. But it depends. Like if you have a normal job, I would say that's going to be pretty tough. If you had some type of freelance work or your own business or that sort of thing, I'm sure you can figure out a way. Like you have a client in town, you meet with some people in town, you speak at a workshop in town, you do some work related things, you speak at a conference there or something like that, then yeah, of course you can write that stuff off.
Perfect. So I'm going to share a special link in the notes here if you want to work with Bobby. So the first one I want to share is beachcommute.com/GWP. I'll share what that is. And the other one is beachcommute.com/businessanywhere. And again, we'll share these in the show notes here. But Bobby, can you explain? So I want to say that I personally am a member of both of these because I love working with Bobby. But if you're listening, as you can hear, like hopefully maybe you got some takeaways from just starting to ask the right questions and thinking through like, what does this mean for you? But if someone is like, okay, I need your help, Bobby. I'm starting a business or I'm an employee or I want to figure out this digital nomad visa or residency and I want your help. What are the kind of options that they could do to work with you?
I'm going to give one quick final thought and then I'll answer that question. One quick final thought. I've been doing this for a long time and I have never, ever, ever, not even one time have I ever got on a consultation call with somebody who was already tax optimized, who was a digital nomad. Not even once. Like
we
seriously.
have no idea what we're doing. I never know.
And I on average do 120-ish to 150-ish consultations a year. Okay? Every year. For going on 2 decades. And I don't say that to be harsh. This is a complex subject, and what happens is it's so complex, people revert to the thing they know because they don't know any better, and they're like, well, I'm Canadian. You know what? I'll just keep paying tax in Canada. I can't tell you how many Canadian clients I've talked to that have been like digital nomads or expats for like 5+ years, and they still file and pay tax in Canada like they always have. Germans, same thing. Like I've talked to countless Americans who didn't even know what FEIE meant. Like I had a client call last week with somebody who's been a digital nomad for 10 years and had never heard of the concept of FEIE. And I'm like,
how did that happen?
Oh my God. I'm like, I don't even want to tell you how much money you could have saved over 10 years. Like, I don't want to disgust you with that information.
Which is probably like over $200,000. More. Way more.
way more because she was earning upper 6 figures for like 10 years. So she was paying over 200,000 in tax
Oh,
every
wow.
year. We're talking well into seven figures she's overpaid in tax. So point is, a lot of these things are very complex topics and they're not easily solvable. And yes, you can go on a bunch of blog posts, you can go on Facebook groups to get information, but again, don't rely on that to be your answer. And if you are a digital nomad or an expat living outside of your home country, I can 99.9% guarantee you are overpaying your taxes right now. I can almost 100% guarantee you, based on my experience, guarantee you're paying way too much in tax. So find somebody, me or somebody else, to walk through this with you and help you getting straightened out, because it saves you an enormous amount of money. And when your mom says, why don't you ever come back and see me for Christmas? And you say, I don't have any money. You can say, actually, this year I do have money because I just saved $40,000 in tax. Okay. And then you said, how can people work with me? So if you're talking about from the consulting side, I do basically, you can just do hourly standalone consultations. I have a membership program where members can join. We have like a bunch of content in there about internationalization strategies. And then you can also book one-on-one calls with me. And then I have kind of up from that, I have a coaching program where it's quite a bit more involved. We get more in depth in your situation. We have more and more frequent calls, and I have a more open schedule for coaching clients for one-on-one calls. So, and then we draft a full written plan of your situation, giving you written recommendations and help you like handhold you through every step of the way. And then the other business that you briefly mentioned, Business Anywhere, that's just our US based company. It's businessanywhere.io. You'll have the link on the site, but that's just where we do US company formations, registered agent service, virtual mailbox, remote notary. We have bookkeeping and accounting and tax filings. We have virtual phone system. We have, I can't remember everything, ITIN applications, patent and trademark applications. There's a bunch of different things in there that you can do within the dashboard. Don't get overly concerned about so many details. Find a professional to help you with the details. Yes, you should be considering it. But when people ask me things like, where should I move? What should I do? I need to optimize for taxes. Should I go here? Listen, I could tell you the best country in the world to optimize your taxes is Zimbabwe. And you might say, Bobby, you're insane. I don't want to live in Zimbabwe. So don't get too hung up on that. Find a place where you want to physically spend time, where your quality of life is good, where you enjoy living, and where you feel good, and optimize around what you want your life to be. Don't, like, I get a lot of people are like, nope, let's fix taxes first and then I'll figure out where to go. Well, it doesn't really work like that. That's not a sustainable journey, because you're not going to maintain that if you don't enjoy like your lifestyle. Yeah. Fix your lifestyle first, figure out what you like, and then let's optimize around that.
That is great advice. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Marissa. Take care.
All right, so there you have it. That was our call with Bobby. So many of you have been asking for this information for a long, long time. So as you can see, the knowledge that you need to understand your personal tax implications, you really need to work with someone who studies this stuff inside and out. So while Jeff and Diego and I have a broad knowledge of some general tips and things that we have learned along the way, that some of our digital nomad friends and people that we travel with, and you know, I attend workshops and seminars and digital nomad conferences, and I hear stuff like this. So I have a good starting place in understanding. The three of us have been living for digital nomads, Jeff, Diego, and I, for the last, 8+ years. And as I said, I have a different residency than my own home country. That's thanks to Bobby's specific advice for me. And actually, when we started Beach Commute, I went to Bobby and Diego was from Germany, Jeff is from the US, I'm from the US. And that had a lot of implications for where we registered our business, what country, what state, what kind of formation. And this is not my expertise. This is not our expertise, nor should it be. We are focused on helping you to find a remote job, on career coaching, on companies, on helping you find a great job that you can do while you travel. We'll help you with with travel tips, but tax implications is not our specialty, which is why it was really important for me to share this information with you today from Bobby. So again, if you're listening to this, there are other people out there, I'm sure, that you could find. I personally, genuinely do not know anyone better than Bobby who does this kind of stuff, which is why I had him on the podcast here, and why I and we as Beach Commute work with him personally. So if you want to work with Bobby, the way that I do is through what's called GWP Insiders. That stands for, I believe, Global Wealth Protection Insiders. So go to beachcommute.com/GWP if you want to find and work with him there. There's a one-time fee to join, and then you pay an annual amount and you get consultation. So I hop on a Zoom call one-on-one with Bobby. I schedule those and he gives me personal information. And that for me changes from year to year as Beach Commute grows or changes or we do things, or as my own situation changes and I want to move somewhere or figure out what I need to do next with my Mexican tax residency, or, if I want to spend more time in the US or less. Bobby literally specifically tells me what I need to know for my situation. And it is very different than even my other digital nomad friends who are very similar, but they're not me and they have different goals, different financial backgrounds, different companies or employees. So if you heard this and you'd love personal advice from Bobby, as you heard on this podcast, that it's, he will listen to you and your exact needs and wants and desires and figure out what is the right solution for you. Check out beachcommute.com/GWP. The money that you can save to me is worth every penny, and to make sure that you do things appropriately. So I am a big fan of this. I use this personally myself, and it's great whether you are just wanting to figure out your own FE, like if it's the FEIE, or if you work for a company and you're trying to figure things out, or you're starting a company or want to optimize, as Bobby said, your digital nomad tax needs. This is a great starting place for you. So it's beachcommute.com/GWP. And then the other option is beachcommute.com/business anywhere. So we use this to register our company in the state that we registered in. It has, as Bobby said, a digital mailbox. So if we have a credit card that needs to be shipped or personal information that goes to our business address that's in a state that none of us live, we do that all through Business Anywhere. Could we do it ourselves? Yes, but I love that everything is handled. It's automatic. It's a really great user interface. It's super easy. So again, I'm sharing this because I genuinely use it. We genuinely use it for our business. So if you're starting a business and would like some support there, go to Beach. And again, this is more of like the tactical, like you're registering your LLC or S Corp or C Corp, just like want support for, again, it's mailboxes, virtual protection, that sort of thing for an existing business. You want to go there, beachcommute.com/business anywhere. And if you want to show up and see Bobby on a screen and get personal advice for him face-to-face, go to beachcommute.com/GWP. So we hope this helps answer some of your tax questions. I had a bunch of other personal questions you guys asked. I tried to do the questions that we asked him here today, or sort of an aggregate of everything you guys asked. So even if it wasn't your specific question that you submitted, there's still pieces of it that I was able to take, and hopefully you at least got a starting point, as Bobby said, to start to understand, like, what do you need to be thinking about? So again, there's a lot of information here, and as Bobby said at the end, try not to get overwhelmed. Yes, you can always be optimizing, but if you're just starting out as a nomad, I have not done the FEIE personally. I have a lot of friends who do, because I wanted to be able to spend more months back home with my family. So there's ways that I could have optimized and personally chose not to. But as I progressed, 6, 7, 8 years into my nomad life, and I wanted to continue to optimize what's best for the future, and as our business grows, or as I want to get residency in different countries, you don't have to do everything right away, but sometimes just understanding what your options are and what you want to do is really, really helpful. So when you're ready to do that, check out beachcommute.com/GWP. And if you like this podcast and you want to make sure you don't miss information from us, check out beachcommute.com/email to hop on our email list, where we share information about podcasts like this, where we share different remote job opportunities. If you want to be able to travel the world and live as a digital nomad, and lots of other travel tips as well. So thank you for listening. Definitely shoot us an email, hello@beachcommute.com, if you have any questions at all. We hope that this was super, super helpful for you as a starting point and potentially just some guidance for your future. So with that, we will see you next week.